the conversation we're going to be having over the next 2 hours is actually an important part of a very important strategy to do certain things. And I'll be covering off what it is we'll be planning to do in a short while. So brace yourselves for a lot of interaction, a lot of thought, a lot of ideas. This is an important one. This could quite literally be the most important event that the Transparency Task Force has ever run. And we've run, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens. Now, there are some new faces on the session, which is absolutely wonderful. I'm therefore going to spend a few moments just briefly introducing myself and the Transparency Task Force, and then we're going to be getting stuck in. The first speaker is actually going to be Kevin Hollinrake MP. We're delighted that Kevin has, at very short notice, arranged things so he can be with us this evening. We've got some absolutely superb speakers, and of course, as you all know, we've also got the man himself, Anthony Stansfeld, which is superb. So the Transparency Task Force, what is it? The Transparency Task Force is a certified social enterprise. Now that bit's important. It means that we are constitutionally structured as an organization that has a very specifically defined purpose. Our purpose isn't about making money, it's about making impact. I've left the idea of making money. I let that idea go many years ago when I set up the TTF. So TTF is all about making an impact, and we are most definitely doing that. We are punching so far above our weight, it's crazy. The mission of the Transparency Task Force is very well defined in our constitution. It's about promoting ongoing reform of the financial sector so that it serves society better. And our vision, if I can ask you all to please put yourselves on mute, our vision is to build, thank you, a highly respected, and for me those two words are incredibly important because there's so little around these days that really is highly respected. But our vision is to build a highly respected, international, influential institution that is dedicated to ensuring that consumers are treated fairly by the financial sector. And we think this is important. It's more than important, it's incredibly important, because the financial ecosystem flows through every aspect of life and society. And if we have a financial system that is in any way suboptimal, if it's diseased, if it's unhealthy, if it's toxic, if it's poisonous, then society cannot flourish as it's meant to. I believe it is impossible, it is absolutely impossible for society to be the way we want it to be if people cannot have trust and confidence in the financial ecosystem. Now, you're all experienced enough to know that there are some massive, and I do mean massive, vested interests at play, but for various reasons, like the things the way that they are. So when people like us try to oppose those vested interests and those conflicted interests, it's a real battle. Anybody, whether individually or collectively, that is trying to significantly improve the way the financial sector works, anybody trying to do that has got an almighty job ahead of them, an absolutely huge job. And my personal belief is that if we were to unite our energies and our efforts and coalesce around particular individuals like Anthony Stanfeld, then we can collectively make a real difference. So please get into the mind of a civilized, constructive activist. That's what's needed. Sitting back and doing nothing isn't going to make a difference. Talking about it isn't going to make a difference. We've got to actually define what our energies and resources are. We've got to channel them. We've got to apply whatever leverage we've got, and we've got to do what we can to make a difference. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier. It is impossible for society to be the way we want it to be if we have a financial ecosystem that the public cannot have trust and confidence in. That's how important the stakes are. And that's why when some individuals, like our keynote speaker today, when some individuals like Anthony stand up rather than stand by consistently, despite the consequences, that's a human being you've just got to admire. That's somebody who we ought to be doing all we possibly can to support. And the word support's important because the idea of this event didn't even happen, okay, properly until quite literally a few days ago. And we've got more people at tonight's session than we've had at any other TTF event in kind of the modern in the Zoom era. It's absolutely marvelous. So let's wonder what we might actually be able to do if we could properly strategize, organize, mobilize, take action in the areas where it's going to make a difference. So there is a big overriding question that this event is dedicated to. And it's very simple and it's very clear. And the question is this: how can we best support Anthony Stansfeld and his ideas? It couldn't be any more specific than that. How can we best support Anthony Stansfeld and his ideas in the full knowledge that Anthony and his ideas are 100% aligned with what the Transparency Task Force is all about? Please don't underestimate our individual and collective capability to make a difference. We do not live in an autocracy, we live in a democracy. People do have power, and people have more power than people normally realize. We just got to figure out the right plan, the right strategy. We can do that. There's so much intellectual horsepower in this community that's gathered today. We can work out what we need to do. Let's figure that out and let's go and do it. Please, please, please do not make the mistake of thinking that you're going to be allowed to be a passenger in this. You're not. I'm not going to let it happen, because I'm absolutely convinced if enough of us consider ourselves to be civilized, cultured, creative, constructive activists, we can do all sorts. We really, really can. We really, really can. I'm going to pass over now to Kevin Hollenrake, another gentleman who, in my mind, has been doing an absolutely sterling job trying to defeat and deal with very, very significant vested interests in the financial ecosystem. I'd like to now invite Kevin Hollenrake MP to say a few words. And thank you again, Kevin, for rearranging things to be with us for a few moments today. Thank you. Over to you, Kevin. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Andy, and for organising tonight's session, and for everybody else attending. I endorse everything you said. I think what we are facing here, and still facing in the UK, is I would describe as a financial feudalism is what we have. And thus far, the progress we have made has been down to a few individuals rather than the regulatory framework. In many ways, the regulatory framework hampers the efforts of people to get justice in many of these matters. And it's people like Anthony who is one of those individuals, and you can name lots of others, the Turners, Sally Masterton, many others, Lawrence Tomlinson, RBS, of course. It's been individuals. And so I entirely agree with you that we're facing a huge problem, but we can crack it. We can make progress if we take the right approach. I absolutely agree that we must take a considered, civilized, constructive approach to this. Simply repeating outlandish claims about what's going on here. We know what we're facing, lots of vested interests. You're absolutely right, but we can make a big difference, as Anthony has done, particularly in the case of HBOS Reading. And I mean, that's the only case, of course, only significant case in the UK of banking fraud that's ever been proven in the British court. And it's a tribute to Anthony and Thames Valley Police that they were dogged enough to take that forward, despite limited resources, of course, which is one of the problems we have here, despite the fact that they got a fraction of what the cost back in terms of mounting that investigation, and despite the fact the regulator and then for the Treasury got a fair whack back. It's just simply wrong that should happen. But we are facing this huge imbalance of power between, as you say, vested interest and particularly in terms of businesses and individuals who have to try and compete with that huge the hugely powerful banking lobby particularly. There's this inequality of arms, both in terms of the consumers and businesses, but also in terms of our crime-fighting agencies. So we put a fraction aside for investigation and prosecution of fraud in the UK. That needs to change. This financial feudalism needs to change. The people at the top of these organisations, I describe as the untouchables, for good reason, I think, need to be held to account, and that has not happened at RBS or Lloyds particularly, which are the most egregious examples of mistreatment at the top of these organisations. I've been MP for 5 years, in business for 30 years, and I've come across good bankers and less good bankers, but generally been treated fairly by the banks. But I also believed all my life that justice is done in the UK. We get justice. This is a democracy. This is a place where justice will prevail, and that's not happening. And nor is justice being seen to be done. And that's a fundamental principle of our society. And many people are working to make sure we do get to that point. But this is a big hill to climb. It's not the UK climbing this alone as well. Lots of other countries are finding the same problem. So we do need to do a few things. We need to change the law. So we need to make failure to prevent economic crime a corporate offence, which you can hold the corporation responsible for. That's the SFO, supercharge their investigations and prosecutions. And but also that will allow individuals to be held responsible for that at a criminal level. So it means directors of companies could be prosecuted for crimes and not for failing to prevent it. It's not enough to say it happened. Oh my God, it happened. If you didn't put the checks and balances in place, you can't blame middle level managers for these problems. We know they don't stop there anyway. Properly fund our crime fighting agencies, which I know Anthony will talk about. We need the FCA to actually step up and use the powers at its disposal. It's not short of powers. It's got the senior manager regime, which is refusing to use still refusing to use in the case of Lloyds, which has been found guilty of terrible abuses of its in terms of its executives, of people like Sally Masterton and the compensation scheme for Lloyds victims. But again, a hopeful end before I hand over to Anthony, and thank Anthony again for all he's done, is about individuals, but we have made change. If you think now we now are addressing these issues, we are highlighting the fact that the SCMCR must be used, we are bringing forward new offences. The government's committed to bring forward this offence of failure to prevent economic crime. We have got the Cranston Review, which completely exposed the travesty that was the Lloyds Bank compensation scheme, for example, which has been redone again, and that came as a result of campaigning by the APPG and others, SME Alliance and others. We have got the BBRS, which is more limited than we would like, but it's a step in the right direction and will afford compensation for many people who haven't seen that compensation already. So there are steps in the right direction. We must continue the momentum, but that momentum will only be as a result of basically the endeavours of individuals like Anthony, but we do that collectively. We try and sing wherever we can with one voice.
Yes.
If we all start criticising each other, and we're the freedom fighters here, then we'll get nowhere. If we all work together, even if we don't always agree exactly what we're working on, then we will much more chance of getting that progress, and we can do it through sensible, constructive criticism. What's there, and I welcome this debate tonight, and I'm really looking forward to what Anthony you've got to say, and you deserve to have this opportunity to talk about the huge achievement you've already got under your belt, and I'm sure many others before you step away from this very important role you've undertaken.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That's wonderful. You've really helped to kick things off superbly. In a moment, I'm going to be passing over to my colleague, Alexandra, who's worked extremely effectively over the last few days, literally the last few days, putting all this together. So thank you so much for that, Alexandra. After that, I'll say a few words and then we'll get on to Anthony. Kevin, thank you very much indeed. Kevin made a really important point, a really, really important point. We haven't got a cat and hell's chance of achieving what we're capable of achieving if we don't find ways to work together. Let's not think about what we disagree about, just ignore that. Let's work out what we agree on, and let's focus on that, and let's build our strategies around where the common ground is. And I can't think of any sane, civilized human being not agreeing on the idea that we need a financial system that is fair, that's transparent, that's truthful, and that's trustworthy. That's what we're fighting for. You know, years and years and years ago, there were all sorts of atrocities being committed in all sorts of ways in relation to things that today we think of as just crazy, balmy. I predict there'll come a time when the financial services sector is trusted, when it regains its sense of honor, its sense of purpose. But there's a bloody great big battle between now and then. There really, really is. Yeah, the vested interests are so strong and so clever and so cunning. We have to work together. So, Kevin, thank you so much. Can we please go to my colleague Alexandra, who's got a few housekeeping points to quickly go through, and then of course I'll introduce Anthony. Thank you, Alexandra.
Hi, evening everyone. Sorry, my dog's crying a bit. Thanks all for coming tonight. Just to quickly let you know, we are recording the event and we will be uploading it to our YouTube channel. So if there's anything you regret saying or you wouldn't want us to include, please let me know. I'll put my email address in the chat. And also, obviously, because there's so many people here, please feel free to introduce yourself, put all your contact details and social media details in the chat. I'll be circulating it tomorrow in a follow-up email. Obviously, like Andy said, if you could, when you're not speaking, keep yourself on mute. This, the mute button is on the bottom left-hand side of your Zoom screen. Yeah, and also please feel free. Sorry, please feel free to tweet about the event. I'll put our Twitter handle and some hashtags in the chat. Okay, so I'll still be here, but I'm going to be turning my camera off. So but I'll still be in the chat if you want to talk to me.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexandra. Thank you. I mentioned earlier that we've got the overriding question for this evening is very specific. Okay, I've just put it into the chat. The question for today's session is, how can we best support Anthony and his ideas? How can we best support Anthony and his ideas? I'm absolutely sure that if we find ways to support Anthony and his ideas, we are all going to be helping ourselves. There's that wonderful philosophy of enlightened self-interest. It's all about helping somebody else with the hope that by doing so, you help yourself. I think Anthony is the absolute perfect person for us to coalesce many of our ideas around. And that's why it's a privilege for me and my team to organise the session that we're about to have today. Anthony's going to be speaking for about 20 minutes or so. We'll then have about 10 minutes Q&A, and then we've got a lineup of other speakers thereafter. So can we please invite Anthony to take the stage, so to speak, and share with us his thoughts about where we are, where we're going, and anything else that he might wish to share. Can we, just before Anthony does that, can we please show our appreciation to Kevin, who's already spoken, and simultaneously welcome Anthony to the stage. Thank you very much indeed. Very, very good indeed. Okay, Anthony, over to you, and thank you, Kevin, so far. Anthony, over to you. Thank you.
And thank you very much. And Kevin, thank you very much for those kind words. I will start off with a slight health warning. I'll use a lot of rather equivocal words like seems, maybe, likely, and alleged, because I've had awful problems with complaints from DLA Piper and KPMG because I left out the word alleged in a private letter to a court. Anyway, I'll leave that. But many thanks to all those people who've written in support of me on that particular issue. When I became PCC, I was really only expecting to do the job for 3.5 years. I was asked to stand. After 3.5 years, the Conservative Party had not decided on a replacement, and I suddenly found myself doing it for another 4. What I didn't expect was COVID to come along and do it for another 5. So I've been the PCC for 8.5 years, which is far longer than I've ever done any other job before in one row. I'm definitely ending on May the 12th, I think is my cut-off date. When I first became PCC, I was aware of an investigation into a possible banking fraud in Reading at a branch of HBOS, and I didn't instigate the case. It was a case that had been refused by 2 other police authorities and by the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office. So we really got it almost as a legacy case. However, we took it on and the investigation went on for 3 years. We had to pull in outside accountants and experts on fraud. And it cost Thames Valley Police £7 million to bring the case to court and prosecute it. At no stage was the bank, which was then Lloyd's, which had taken over HBOS, particularly helpful. In fact, almost the exact opposite. And we had endless issues over disclosures. I think if we'd had the bank's cooperation, it would have taken a lot less time and cost us a lot less money. But most of the staff involved in the HBOS case were then working for Lloyd's. We only prosecuted on 245 million. We don't know exactly what the full fraud was, but it was probably around about 850 million. That is the estimate that I've been given. I think the police thought there was no point in prosecuting more than the 245 million. We wouldn't have got heavier sentences. They were very heavy sentences anyway. What was it? I think 49 years for the 6 defendants. The case would have taken us much longer to bring to court. Whether the jury would have ever understood some of it was open to doubt. So I think it was a reasonable decision to only prosecute on part of the fraud. However, there was a considerable downside to doing that. And that was, of course, that Lloyd's wouldn't admit to any other part of the fraud, which meant the compensation to a huge number of people whose cases were not actually directly brought up in court were not settled, and that is still going on. Lloyd's boasts about the case about having paid out 100 million in compensation. Well, it was an odd case. It was a two-way case. The bank was actually being defrauded at the same time. It was probably about 50-50, but that still leaves best part of 300 million in compensation that hasn't been paid to victims. And we've had the Professor Griggs look at this, and I think most people thought that was a farce. I think Sir Ross Cranston went quite a lot further, but still left an awful lot untouched. And we now have, and Kevin Hollinrake mentioned that we still are going for a number of other ones. What was extraordinary is that throughout the investigation, Lloyd's absolutely refused to admit a fraud had actually been perpetrated at all. What they thought was happening, if it wasn't a fraud, I simply don't know. However, there were internal emails, which I have seen, between senior staff within Lloyd's actually talking about the fraud well before it was actually brought to justice. So it was a pack of lies, I'm afraid. Lloyd's also made a huge effort to ensure that we didn't prosecute on more than 250 million, because this meant that it wouldn't be reflected in a lot of the accounts under the Lord Turnbull rules. And again, there is ample evidence of that. One of the pieces of evidence that emerged was the Turnbull report written by Sally Masterton. Now, it wasn't actually used in the court case, which I think it was a pity. But this internal report clearly lays out over about 155 pages that the bank was aware of the fraud and covered it up, that there was a huge hole in the bank's accounts, as the HBOS accounts, that was overlooked by KPMG of 38 billion. That has to be a record for an audit. And of course, I remind you, KPMG also audited the Co-op and Carillion. So they seem to be carrying on the normal practice. And both Lloyd's and HBOS, it's brought out in this internal report, had done very large rights issues on the back of these accounts. I think it was 3 billion and 13 billion. I don't have the figures off the top of my head. When the report was written, Sally Marston was promptly sacked, and her report was concealed from their own chairman, Lord Blackwell. The Financial Conduct Authority, however, did receive the report, and it did precisely nothing about it. It held no one responsible, it didn't look into it, and it allowed the sacking of Sally Masterton, all of which is utterly disgraceful and took place, I have to say, under the Egypt of our present Governor of the Bank of England. The bank said that Sally Masterton had basically lost the plot, her report was unauthorised, and it was unsubstantiated. Well, she certainly hadn't lost the plot. Her report was authorised, and I've seen the emails between her and the head of audit and risk within Lloyd's Bank discussing it. And the fact that it was unsubstantiated, I've yet to see anything in the report that lawyers could actually say was unsubstantiated. I think practically it was all substantiated. Eventually, 3 years after she was sacked, I and Lord Hurley went up to see Lord Blackwell, and we had a meeting with him. We said that this is basically unacceptable. And I think we put enough pressure on, and her own lawyers were also putting on pressure, that she was eventually compensated, but needless to say, with a non-disclosure agreement. And she has had a number of interviews I'm aware of with Dame Linda Dobbs's team, who are looking into what went on. And I can talk about that later if necessary. I had a meeting with Lord Blackwell on February 2017. At that meeting, he had his head of he had his senior counsel, and he also had his head of operations. So we had one member of the executive board, and the executive board, I think, only had 3 people on it. At that meeting, it was quite apparent, and I asked him directly whether he'd actually read the Sally Marston report. He absolutely denied he'd read it, and I believed him. What was quite, I think was fairly clear, was the executive board had concealed the report from their own chairman, which again goes against all the senior management regulations and rules. But I then insisted that they give him the report, and I sent him a recorded delivery copy of it. So he undoubtedly got the report, and I then expected him to take some action. And I think when you read it, most people would have said that the executive board was unfit for purpose at that stage. If you've been the chairman, that is the job of the chairman, to hold them to account. He held nobody to account as far as I'm aware, and he did not even give it to his non-executive directors. And I say that because I wrote to their senior non-executive director and said, have you read this report? And they would not reply to me on that. And I got a letter back from the company's secretary saying, all this will be looked into by the Dame Linda Dobbs report. Well, here we are 3 or 4 years later, and absolutely nothing has been done about it. So I don't think the executive board, the chairman, or the non-executive board come out of this remotely well. But what was also worrying, that none of the regulatory authorities did anything about it. Not the Bank of England, the Serious Fraud Office, the National Crime Agency, the FCA, the City of London. Absolutely nobody took action. What became apparent, I think, fairly rapidly after the HBOS case is that it wasn't unique. It seemed to be going on in other banks, and probably on a rather larger scale. The Royal Bank of Scotland took down, I believe, 16,000 companies. They went into their global recoveries group. Some of the companies of that 16,000 clearly were not viable. However, a great number were. The GRG was not meant to be a profit centre. It was hugely profitable. How could it possibly have made so much money from companies it was bankrupting? It clearly was recovering vastly more than the bank could ever possibly have been owed by them. And again, that has never been looked into or investigated. Why do we have a financial conduct authority, I sometimes wonder. But similar tactics would seem to have been used by Lloyds itself out of Bristol, Gresham Street, Leeds, and possibly elsewhere. I think the only real difference I can see between HBOS and the other banks was HBOS was also defrauded itself. It was a two-way fraud. RBS and Lloyds seem to have had rather tighter control, and only customers seem to have been ruined by it. What has also become apparent is that many legal practices, practically all our major accountancy companies and some of our estate agents have been closely involved with the banks with these frauds. And they would seem to have been helped by either, and I have to say I find this extraordinary, and I say it, advisedly, either incompetence or naivety within our judicial system, the Insolvency Service, and the Land Registry. Julian Watts has put together 21 large files covering well over 500 cases, and if you add up sums of money, it runs into billions. Now, the Treasury Select Committee asked the NCA to look into this, I think 17 or 18 months ago. At last, they appear to be looking into one case. Most of them, and whatever people say, there may be one or two there that aren't completely genuine, the vast majority seem to involve forgery after forgery of documents that go in front of courts. Whether they're forged signatures, you'll get the same signature with many different names, or many different names with the same signature. And these are documents that go in front of courts. You can't sign for other people. In America, the banks were fined $25 billion for this practice. But it goes far further than that. Its bank guarantees appear to have been forged. Parallel bank accounts were going on, and there was clear evidence of that. That very large bank accounts were being opened in people's names without them being aware of it. And their bank account would then be lent a very large sum of money with enormous interest rates, 15, 16, 17% interest rates. So they were running up huge debts against people which they didn't even know about, on accounts they were unaware about. I think there's been an extraordinary refusal by the regulatory authorities to even look into this. And also, it's not just the government ones, it's also the trade bodies, like the Solicitors Regulatory Authority. Why don't they look into these things? Why does the estate agency, what's it, Federation of Chartered Surveyors and everything, look into these cases? But they don't. The trade bodies seem far more interested in protecting their members than safeguarding their customers. And one really extraordinary case is the actions of Burgess Salmon, a legal practice that is very closely associated with Lloyd's in Bristol, and also, I may say, with the Crown Estates, rather worryingly. This was investigated by another practice, Bevan Britain, after a large number of staff had to leave in a considerable hurry. The Solicitors Regulatory Authority has concealed their report in spite of a great many having lost everything through this practice and through Lloyd's in Bristol. They won't release it. And I have asked, and I've had an absolute refusal, and it would be very good to see the Bevan Britain report to find out exactly what was going on down there. I think the worry is that when a fraud is reported to the police, and all of these frauds are reported, it is usually said either to be a civil matter. Well, how can it be a civil matter if forged documents are being used? It is clearly a criminal matter. And the standard one is reported to action fraud. Well, the latter, action fraud, is really a completely toothless call centre in Glasgow. It does correlate cases and sees if they're connected and tries to distribute them back down to police forces, but only a few actually get back to police forces. And even when they are, very, very few cases are actually followed up. Probably less than 1% of reported frauds are ever brought to court and successfully prosecuted and the victim recompensed. I think half the problem is the police neither have the time, capacity, capability, or money to take on a fraud, especially against if banks or lawyers are involved. And the banks have unlimited amounts of money, their shareholders' money, to fight it through the biggest legal practices in London. And Lloyd's spends, I think it's over 800 million a year on lawyers. And it's also very difficult for other legal practices to defend somebody. They're up against the very big boys. Many of them have their careers to look into. And of course, the person being defrauded who's lost their money doesn't have the money to actually afford a proper defense. So they end up in court trying to defend themselves against a judge who's totally unsympathetic and will always believe what the banks tell them, which is a degree of naivety I find quite extraordinary. One of the problems, I think, is if we're to tackle fraud properly, we actually need to know the scale of the problem. I went to a National Crime Agency presentation, and one presenter said fraud was running at 190 billion a year, and that is only marginally less than the National Health Service. The entire cost of that is probably rather more this year. The next presenter said it was running at 3 billion a year. I put up my hand and said, can you explain where the 187 billion has gone missing? So if our own National Crime Agency hasn't a clue what the scale of the problem is, we have a problem here. Half the problem, and I mentioned it before, is we simply don't have the money to take on major fraud at the moment. But that shouldn't be difficult to finance. It should be done largely through the fines that you raise through carrying out the investigations. I believe it would pay for itself. Over the HBOS affair, Lloyds was fined £60 million. And for some extraordinary reason, the FCA then let them off £15 million for good behaviour. Well, I wouldn't have let them off a penny. I'd have put a naught on the 60 million. But that £45 million all reverted straight to the Treasury. Not a penny came back to Thames Valley Police for conducting the case, in spite of me actually asking the Chancellor, writing to him directly and saying, could you pay us back? That 45 million, if it had gone into fraud cases, would have made a huge difference across the country. And of course, the one lesson that came out of the HBOS case was it is simply too expensive to take on a major bank, which has unlimitedly deep pockets. Now, I think there are a number of things we can do to start sorting this out. The first thing is we need to set up proper fraud investigation hubs at a regional level. Currently, we hold counterterrorism, the police, counterterrorism and serious organised crime are run by the police regionally because they're too big subjects to run in small forces or even in large ones. Well, there should be a third arm. It should be a fraud investigation hub. And it won't need many police officers, but it does need proper trained accountants and people who understand what they're talking about. It's no good expecting police officers who are not trained accountants really to investigate fraud. It's very difficult for them. We need the government and the establishment to actually recognise fraud is a huge drain on the economy. If you steal £1 million through the front door of a bank or a building, you'll find the police are all over it. Steal through fraud £1 billion, and it's absolutely totally ignored at the moment. There's no investigation. We need clear lines of responsibility between the regulatory authorities, no more passing the buck between each other, which goes on the whole time. I mean, just the National Crime Agency and the Financial Conduct Authority. Surely the clue is in the name. National Crime Agency should be dealing with crime. And if fraud involves crime, which it does, and forged signatures and documents, then the NCA should be taking it on. If it's a conduct issue, then the Financial Conduct Authority should be dealing with it. But at the moment, neither seems to. When did either of them last prosecute a major fraud? Or indeed the SFA, for that matter, successfully. We need a proper large economic crime investigation centre within the National Crime Agency. And it needs proper governance too, which I don't believe it has at the moment. We want to stop playing at it. We have a National Economic Crime Centre within the NCA, but it has never taken on a fraud. It's far too small and it doesn't have the investigatory capability, I believe, to do that. It's a start, but it needs to be hugely larger and it needs the money behind it. And why is the City of London responsible for fraud? When did the City of London last prosecute a fraud? A major fraud against a bank or something. They're the ones that are meant to be doing it, not Thames Valley Police, good old provincial police force down in the countryside, albeit a large one, but it doesn't do it. And the SFO, again, I think is far too small actually to take on more than any of these very large cases. And I think it should be combined into the National Crime Agency in a proper division. I could go on for a lot longer, but I won't bore you further. I think the one ray of hope coming down the line is the Dame Linda Dobbs report, which was meant to be one that should have taken about a year to do, is now in its 5th year. It is obviously a massive report because every stone they overturn, they turn over, they find another disaster lurking underneath it. I think it will be a devastating report. I have an absolute assurance, personally, from Robin Buddenberg, the new chairman of Lloyds, that it will be released, that it will not be concealed, because of course it's an internal report financed by Lloyds, which I find extraordinary because the excuse that we get from the FCA and everybody else is they're waiting for the Dame Linda Dobbs report. Well, they shouldn't be waiting for this report. It's an internal report of Lloyds. They should have done it themselves ages ago. However, I think the report will be good when it eventually comes out. But in the 5 years or so that it has taken to write, of course, it has left a huge number of people without houses, without their homes, without their companies, and without money. And I mean, it is pathetic, some of the cases that I have to listen to. So I could go on for a lot longer, but I won't. I think I've just about filled my time. I retire in 3 months, and I hope that some other PCC will take on the work I've done. I've had one offer that has come in, which is the prospective, one of the prospective candidates for Avon and Somerset, which of course has Bristol within it. That would actually be thoroughly satisfactory, I have to say, if Mark Shelford, who was the person who got on to me, actually became the PCC, because I think we'd see some action, and no more is it required more, I have to say, than in Bristol. I hope that my making waves for the last few years on this has had some effect. And I think the government is beginning at last to wake up to the problem with fraud. And I noticed that in the strategic police requirements that the Home Office issued, fraud is now being incorporated within it, which it was not in the past. But talk is not enough. We actually need the money and the organisation to sort out fraud. Anyway, thank you very much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thank you very, very much indeed. So much insight, so much experience, so much evidence of you speaking truth to power courageously. You do what most people don't do at your kind of level. You speak out and you speak the truth, and it's such an admirable quality, and we are all greatly appreciative of it, because if it weren't for you doing what you're doing and other people like you doing what you're doing, the status quo would just remain the same. It's obvious that the vested interests are that strong. What we'll do now, folks, is open for questions. So please just raise your hand if you'd like to make a point. Please do that. We've got quite a few people here. We're going to go to Brian Basham first of all, and I really must thank Brian, because it was a conversation with Brian a few days ago that really helped this the idea of this event to come together. So, Mr. Brian Basham, please do briefly introduce yourself and share your point. Thank you. You might be on mute, Brian. I think you are, yeah. Bottom left of your screen.
So got it. I'm an old financial hack investigator. I was one of the founders of the Centre for Investigative Journalism. And as you can probably see from my T-shirt, I'm a Labour supporter. And that's the great strength of this, is that it's a cross-party matter. I know Kevin Hollingrake has absolutely proved to me that Nye Bevin was wrong when he introduced Conservatives as a whole, because we have some very, very good people who are working together on all of this. My local MP, Hugh Merriman, is also particularly interested, and he's a Tory. I'm sad about him being a Tory, but I'm very pleased that he's representing. So there we are. I've been delighted to introduce Anthony, who's been a chair of a Tory Conservative Association, to Prem Seeker, who was Lord Seeker now, who was John McDonnell's advisor. John particularly made a principle of not succumbing to what he calls corporate capture by bringing in firms of accountants to help him. Prem put together a terrific team which put together John's package, you know, and Prem is a huge supporter of all that we're talking about here. I've just spoken to Clive Hollick, Lord Hollick, just before I came online here, who's a tremendous supporter of Anthony's. They went together and frankly beat up Blackwell, who much deserved it. John Sharkey, Lord Sharkey, was Saatchi and Saatchi advertising man who, when Tim Bell retired in 1987, ran Margaret Thatcher's election, you know, and he is the man who first, to my knowledge, tried to bring in failure to prevent. Now, after my career as a journalist, I started a public relations company, which was quite a big one, and very successful, and we specialised in takeover bids. And I spent my life advising main board directors and chairman, only chairman and chief executives, never finance directors. Keep away from the finance directors, only advise chairman and chief executive. And I can tell you that the one thing that grabs their attention is personal jeopardy. If they feel that they're going to get in trouble, then they'll do something. If it's going to just be a corporate affair, then it doesn't matter, the shareholders can pay. And that has been the story of the banking sector. Banks have paid since 2000, and I think it's 8, might be 10, 71 billion in fines. And that is amazing. And if those fines had gone, a fraction of those fines had gone to law enforcement, then we wouldn't have a problem today. There's the situation in the States, because the financial systems are so intertwined, is even worse. The banks in the States since 2010 have paid 462 billion in fines, which is 8 times more than the next most transgressive sector, which is oil and gas. And Andy and I have been trying to help a wonderful man called Gregor Roy, and I commend you to Violation Tracker, which we really need in the UK. It brings transparency to the terrible fines that the banks pay in order to escape prosecution. Many of these are non-prosecution agreements. So we have it there. I direct you also, if I might be so bold, to the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, which sprang out of the Centre for Investigative Journalism, and which Clive Hollick supports. And they have a major campaign going at the moment, focused on exactly what Anthony was talking about. They call it the enablers. And by that they mean the law firms and the banks, the law firms, the banks, and particularly the accountancy firms, who are definitely not crooked because they spend a lot of money on lawyers proving that they're not crooked, but actually morally are completely bankrupt. And those are the people we need to get after. Prem Sikka has recently introduced a clause in the finance bill that would allow the next head of the FCA to be scrutinized by, I think, a Lords committee. Clive Hollick is involved in chairing one. There's a huge amount going on, and I commend also to you Prem Sikka's tremendous work on the conflicts that take place within our ridiculous system. If it was in Zimbabwe, we'd laugh at what happened. I can tell you, I launched KPMG 35 years ago or something like that. The man I reported to was Ian Barlow, who was a bright young accountant, partner put in charge of it. He became head of taxation for KPMG, then senior partner, and his next move, chair of HMRC. How could it be? You couldn't make it up. It's ridiculous. So there we are.
Thank you.
But the financial, I'm just going to finish. The financial community has its clause embedded in the system, political funding, and into the newspaper sector, sadly. Peter Oborne, who is a great journalist, worked for the Telegraph and resigned because they wouldn't cover the huge scandal that was HSBC funding Mexican drugs cartels. And he went to work for the Daily Mail, which isn't a much better. But anyway, he was an honest man, and I commend you to get on Google, read Osborne resignation letter. It'll make your hair stand on end. Anyway, thanks, Andy.
Brian, thank you very much indeed. Superb input. These really are big issues. I'm going to share some information about Violation Tracker. I know that some of you have heard me talk about Violation Tracker before, just to really drive home the point that's just been made. And somebody put this in the chat so correctly. The banks treat fines as a cost of doing business. I think that was in the chat. And just to kind of prove that point so well, take a look at this data. So this is Violation Tracker. We're bringing Violation Tracker to the UK. We've got a UK advisory board. We've got some real energy coming around to this, because it's basically like it's a bit like an X-ray machine. It's an X-ray machine into which corporations are doing what wrong. And this is the point that Brian was making so powerfully just now. Look, the financial services sector, 330 billion, not million, $330,904,834.105 in fines since the year 2000. Massive amount. That's bigger than, I think that's bigger than some countries' GDP. The next worst is pharmaceuticals. Bearing in mind all the opioid crisis and all the rest of it, about 7 times worse than it. This is a huge issue. And when you click on financial services, you get into the next level of detail down. And what the data is basically telling you, I haven't got time to go through this properly, but what the data is basically telling you is that the same banks carry on doing the same things over and over again, which has to bring to the surface 2 bloody great big questions. How can we think the regulatory framework is working when, if the purpose of the regulatory framework is to create good conduct in the market, it's not working. It's clearly not working. And if the culture in the banks are so rotten that they are somehow happy to accept this kind of conduct as being acceptable, and they just carry on doing it, then it's absolutely bananas. So that's so much powerful stuff there. We're going to go back to the gallery so I can see if anybody would like to make a quick point. We do need to keep on schedule, folks. I'm going to go to Sue Flood very quickly, please, Sue, if you don't mind. Thank you. And there's quite a few screens, so I cannot see you all at the same time. So bear with me as I try to manage this as best as I can. But nice and quickly, Sue, that would be great. Thank you. You might be on mute, Sue.
Hi, everybody. Just a quick one. There needs to be Home Office reporting going on. Until they are accountable at the Home Office for fraud, nothing's going to change. So I'd like to put that on to Anthony, that Home Office reporting is on his agenda to make some changes.
Thank you, Sue. And please do put that into the chat. All the ideas you have, please capture in the chat. That way we can actually manage them. We'll work.
Thank you, Anthony.
I know that Anthony would like to respond to that point. Please do, Anthony. Thank you.
Yes, it's certainly the buck stops within the Home Office, and I've had my talks with them. Absolutely nothing was done. I had one senior civil servant who read a lot of what I gave, and all he could say was, my God, and then did nothing about it. But I think the worry is the coziness of the whole system, that the FCA, a very large number of their employees come from Lloyd's. Their chairman until last year was previously senior partner of KPMG.
It's a roundabout.
And the chairman of the PRA, which is meant to keep an eye on the auditors and gave the audit a clean bill of health, his previous job was chairman of Lloyd's. It's difficult to make this up. And until you can break this coziness, it is very difficult to actually get at it, because the system covers itself up the whole time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our next person that would like to make a point. Ian Tyler, let's go to you, Ian.
I'll keep it really quick. I totally agree with the point that the regulators in the UK are just a bit too comfortable and cozy. I mean, even when you just went to that violation tracker, it struck me like, say, like the FX sort of manipulation. Whilst London is the global centre of FX, you know, half the world's FX is traded in London. Actually, it was a US regulator that started the investigation into the malpractices. So again, the UK regulators asleep on the job really on this, and that's just an example. I'm not saying it's the US, whilst they're not perfect, it is fair to say the regulators are a lot more aggressive in the way they go after the financial institutions to try and drive better behaviour. Whilst in the UK, it is just a bit cozy. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. I'm very, very proud to say that we have both the Wall Street Journal and the Times represented today. And I know that James Hurley from the Times would like to make a point. James, over to you, please. Thank you.
Evening, Andy. Thanks very much for organising this, and well done, Anthony. And I think a lot of good points made about everything you've brought to light and achieved in recent years. I just wanted to make a very quick, response to something that Brian said. And while I agree with Brian that sometimes some of that capture that we've been talking about this evening does happen in newspapers, I don't think it does happen to anywhere near the degree that sometimes some people imagine. And I'd also just like to make the point that I think, for example, the interest rate swap scandal, which ended up costing the banks like about 20-30 billion quid. That only came out because of the Telegraph. GRG probably wouldn't have come out anywhere near to the extent it did if it hadn't have been for various news outlets. The HSBC drugs cartel scandal came out partly because of journalism. You can go on and on and on and on. But yeah, so that capture is there, and it is a problem. And I know quite a lot about that incident that led to Brian's, that led to Peter O'Born's letter, and it was pretty remarkable stuff. That is unusual from having done 10, 15 years in this industry. That was a very unusual incident.
Thank you very much, James, for your contribution. If somebody's got a link to that letter, please do put it into the chat. Thank you very much indeed. We've got time for one more comment or question from somebody before we move on. Let's see. I can't see all of you in one go, so bear with me, folks. I think we've got Francisca. Let's go to Francisca. Thank you, Francisca.
It's a very quick question.
Thank you. Perfect.
I feel that there is a proliferation of different bodies, and it's very confusing for people to know who can help. And I noticed in the speech that Anthony Scanskill felt there should be a more powerful organisation. I can't help feeling, wouldn't it be great if it was all one body?
Thank you. I know that Anthony's got views on that. Anthony, please do respond to the point that's just been made. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, my screen has just gone blank. Yes, I think, if you can hear me, there should be a central body. I think ideally it should be in the National Crime Agency. But at the moment, the National Crime Agency has no capabilities to deal with fraud at all. But that seems to be the natural place it should go. And said, if a fraud is committed within the United Kingdom, then it should be the regional police forces that should deal with it with a proper team. If it involves international fraud, then it should be the National Crime Agency that should deal with it.
Thank you, Anthony, very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's all show our appreciation for Anthony, not just for what he's done tonight, but of course, way over and above that, what he's been doing for many, many years. Anthony, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. You really are an inspiration to all of us. Thank you very much indeed. We've now got a series of very short speaking slots. If I can ask the speakers to keep it to 2 or 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 at an absolute stretch, but please be as succinct as you can. We're going to go in the following order. David Leahy, Michelle Young, John Banerjee, Liz Watson, and there's another batch after that. So David, Michelle, John, Liz. So let's invite David Leahy to speak. And this event, it was actually initiated by a comment in passing that David made at one of our events literally just last week. David, please introduce yourself and share with us your thoughts about Anthony, the work that he's been doing, and so on. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Andy. Hello, everyone. I'm, as you all know, an ex-detective, criminal investigator, and been investigating fraud for many years. What a lot of you don't know is that 10 years since I've retired, I've been investigating criminal fraud and banking fraud in Eastern Europe up against the mafia and corrupt judges, and we won out there. And I can tell you that what we're up against here makes the mafia in Eastern Europe look like kindergarten. We are up against it. Yeah, I agree totally with Anthony. I'm here to support him. You'll probably heard me on the UK column in support of Anthony. Everything he is saying is exactly correct, and everything I can report on is from my personal experience. I have attempted to get justice through civilized approach, as Andy said earlier on. Every time I've been whitewashed. We've been pushed left, right, and centre. The Financial Conduct Authority, the FOS, you name it, the NCA, the Action Fraud, the Land Registry play a big role in this. Whatever's going on, there seems to be a reluctance to even address that there's criminality. I've heard people say that we need central powers, etc., etc. To steal a phrase from Professor Nigel Harper, what we really need is an independent controller for banking and professional complaints regulator. That would be funded by disbanding the FOS, the SFO, the NCA, Action Fraud, and putting all those funds into one umbrella organisation with local agencies such as the, as Anthony said, in the local police forces to deal with fraud. My personal experience is that all of these departments are connected through a network of, I call them sleeper cells, and everything I have come up against a connection which has had a quiet word and stopped what we've been doing. Yes, we need a grounded approach, but what I would say is there are sufficient laws in place currently to deal with it. We don't need any more regulators. We don't need any laws. What we need to do is apply the laws. For instance, the company secretary for a company is responsible for the lawful compliance of that company.
Yeah.
I have sufficient evidence to arrest a raft of bank managers, regulators, etc., in an ideal world with a level playing field. However, if we went ahead and did that, we would get nowhere, because there are connections that stop us proceeding, completely stop us proceeding. Naive judges, and what I've been finding is that the banks are actually ruled by the bent lawyers. The lawyers are dictating to the banks, and I've had personal experience of that, where the banks have wanted to back off, and the lawyers have kept pushing harder and harder to keep the offences within the civil courts, because they can bleed us dry through funds, through fees and disbursements and all of those other things. We had the Turnbull report, and I'm going from notes now, trying to be as quick as I can, so I'm all over the place. We had the Turnbull and Dobbs report, but they were both bank controlled. Well, all I can say is now, if you're in the bank, watch out. We now have a leaked report, and all I can tell you is it's Operation Meadow. We have reconstructed it with all the criminality in it, and this is a career-making report for a police officer. This would push a dozen police officers to chief superintendent level in my old days of policing. The names and the deeds and the things that can be revealed in this report, which we've reconstructed with a number of experts, are absolutely devastating. And we were corrected when we said it's bigger than Watergate. We were corrected by one expert who said this is much bigger than Watergate. Now, the time for the people to come clean, the banks to put things right, is now, because if this report comes out, it is very politically sensitive, and I believe that there will be people going to prison.
David, thank you very much indeed. Wow, such powerful points. Can we please show our appreciation to David for sharing his thoughts and his insight, and he's obviously been doing a tremendous job trying to get some truth and some justice out there. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I'm going to go to Mark Bishop for a very, very quick comment, and I'm squeezing you all time-wise. You can tell I'm doing that. Please let me have permission to beat you up and squeeze you down. So Mark Bishop, as short as you can, please, and then we'll go to our next speaker, Michelle Young. Mark.
Okay, I'd just like to plant an idea in everybody's minds for discussion during this session. It's this: we all know what the problems are, and we largely know what the solutions are, but we also know who the blockers are that prevent those solutions from being implemented to solve the problems. So really the question we should be asking ourselves is, how do we persuade, the Treasury, some politicians, the FCA, those sorts of people, how do we persuade those people to go along with the kind of suggestions that are necessary for the problem to be solved?
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. It's a really great point. Please capture it in the chat as well, so we can work with the idea later. Let's now go to Michelle Young. Michelle, if you can squeeze it into 2 minutes, that'd be great. 3 minutes would be okay. 4 minutes tops. Go for it, Michelle. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you. You might be on mute, Michelle. Where's our Michelle?
Is that right? Can you hear me now?
We can. Go for it, Michelle. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, firstly, for organising this evening. And thank you to Anthony from We the People for all your incredible work going against the establishment on the crimes against humanity through the financial instruments they're using in the courts. A lot of these court documents are forged documents, and that's how they're stealing from the people. My court documents are forged documents. So I would say to everyone on this call, if they can get the documents over to the person that's dealing with the forged document campaign, so that we can add to the 21 files. The more documents we can prove that are forged, and there's a couple of journalists on this call, why don't we get one of these journalists with Anthony with these forged documents, say that we've been to all the institutions, the SFO, all the other bodies, and they are ignoring this evidence. Why don't we do an article to expose the fact that the SFO are ignoring, and the police, the forged court documents. That's one thing I think we should be thinking of. And those journalists on this call, we can give you the numbers, journalists, on how many people are being defrauded. It's time that we had a good mainstream article in the public's interest. And it's not just happening in the insolvency courts, it's happening in the family courts, where mothers are losing their children, are losing their assets, some men as well, but the family courts are completely rigged, and so are the insolvency courts. Now, I think one answer to stop this asset stripping is we get 1 or 2 cases. We show in bankruptcy fraud, for instance, these companies, properties, bank accounts have been stolen through this forced instrument. And we bring 1 or 2 of those accountants, those insolvency practitioners, and say, right, now we want to see the evidence. You're in charge of this estate. Where are those assets? We've got to also independently have the auditing done. We have to fund, that's another article the journalists should be thinking about, where we go to the media and we say we want now to have a funding campaign so we can independently audit the auditors, because it's pointless. These assets are going to constantly be stolen through the banks, the courts, unless we, the people, independently audit the auditors. So I would suggest that would be a great campaign on the forged court documents with the mainstream media and in the public's interest, and also a campaign to raise funding to have an independent audit done on the auditors. That would resolve a lot of problems very quickly.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed. Let's show our appreciation to Michelle for sharing her thoughts. Thank you, Michelle. We're now going to go to John Banerjee. John's been extremely helpful in the last couple of months with some pretty heavyweight consultation responses we're putting into HM Treasury and the Treasury Select Committee, as have various other people on this session, including Mark Bishop, who's been absolutely outstanding in carrying the weight necessary to get these submissions in. Mr. John Banerjee, over to you. Keep it under 2-3-4 minutes if you can, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So I'll be as brief as I can. My name is John Banerjee. I'm an RBC whistleblower. That's how I'm known. Anyway, I used to have a career in trading for international banks. And I would like to express my personal gratitude to Anthony Stansfeld for making an extraordinary difference to a system that ought not need people like Anthony Stansfeld. Unfortunately, he's almost singular. But I want to explain precisely how somebody like Anthony Stansfeld, and I'm very conscious of the fact that we're going to lose him shortly from his position as Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley Police, but how much of a difference he makes and how. We've already heard a lot about how the playing field is incredibly uneven. I mean, you have essentially financial institutions with effectively unlimited resources against individuals. It's almost finite versus infinite resources, and attrition is always the go-to strategy, even where many hundreds or even thousands of people have been defrauded. Essentially, banks can always outmuscle the victims of fraud and financial wrongdoing. Even in the very rare cases, so I was the first whistleblower to win a case of in the employment tribunals against the large financial institution since the senior manager and certification regime came in. And I'd like to remind everyone that Governor or ex-Governor Mark Carney stated in the Wreath Memorial Lectures last Christmas that the principal advance in UK financial regulation in reaction to the global financial crisis was to inject personal accountability into the regulatory regime. And this was done via the introduction of the senior managers and certification regime in March 2016. some 8 years after the global financial crisis. Now, I think that pretty much everyone in the chat this evening thinks that personal accountability would be a great way of changing conduct. The other principal ways were fining financial institutions properly for wrongdoing and not make it just a cost of doing business, and also using that fine revenue to fund a proper investigator of financial crimes. But personal accountability would be an enormous advance. I agree with Governor Carney in terms of sentiment. The problem is that the regulatory structure that we have is one where literally it'll be 5 years old in a few weeks' time, and there have been zero enforcements under the SMCR. Now, zero, some people think of it as a nothing number. I think of it as being an incredibly informationally laden number. The FCA press office repeatedly, falsely claims that they have made one action under the SMCR, and that's Jez Staley, as Mark Stewart has personally confirmed to me, and as the enforcement notice states, that's not true. He was done under the existing code of conduct rules for going after a whistleblower not once but twice, having been warned off, having been caught the first time. Anyhow, getting back to what Anthony Stansfeld does, most people whom he positively influences are unable to speak about what he's done because of if there's been a successful resolution, often that involves a non-disclosure agreement. Similarly, there are issues about reprisals and so on. I haven't signed an NDA, and so I'm able to tell you a little bit about what Anthony's done for me. And in essence, what he's done is stuck his head up above the parapet and overseen interactions between the FCA and a whistleblower in my case, and pointed out where questions have been asked repeatedly, respectfully, and been absolutely ignored. He's gently in the background intervened to suggest that actually these questions are reasonable and deserve answers. And it's very subtle, but very, very important for people in power to know that other people who are of unimpeachable reputation and substance are overlooking their actions. It can make a small but enormous difference. There are other things that I would love to be able to go into greater detail about, and once hopefully criminal enforcement action is taken, I would love to come back and thank Anthony more fully. But all I can say is, I said earlier that I was grateful. I think I'll be eternally grateful. Without Anthony Stansfeld, I don't think I'll have got as far as I have. He's an extraordinary man. We're going to lose an awful lot. Just one tiny thing I want to say is that because he's willing to stand up and ask awkward questions of very, very powerful people, the vested interests are also inclined to essentially engage in smear campaigns, as we've seen an attempted smear campaign recently. And I'd be extremely interested offline to try to see what we could do as an organization to counter that, because frankly, it's heinous, it's absolutely disgusting, and we really must stand up for somebody who's stood up for so many. Thank you.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. John, thank you very much indeed. I think the quote was, we must stand up for somebody who stood up for so many. I'm sure absolutely everybody on this session will buy into that big time. I'm going to ask Nicholas Wilson to speak. Nicholas, can you wave your hand at me so I can see you? Nicholas Wilson, you there somewhere? Nicholas, can you say whatever the point was you wanted to say earlier, but could you also talk to everybody about the video that you made with Steve Middleton and I've forgotten who the other gentleman's name was, about the way the banks are getting around SMCR. Please share your thoughts around that, please, Nicholas. Very good to have you with us tonight. Go for it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I mean, the first thing I wanted to say was the problem is at the top, and David, who spoke just now, will understand what I'm talking about. As everybody knows, HSBC entered into a DPA in America in 2012. After 5 years, they were released from that DPA, presuming that they had behaved. And everybody knows they were laundering money from Russia. They were the FinCEN files recently showed that they were laundering a Ponzi scheme finance. They were released on that on the 11th of December 2017. On the 12th of December 2017, the SFO advertised for a new Director General. The new Director General of the SFO is Lisa Ostrovsky, who was HSBC's monitor on that DPA, where they continued laundering money for 5 years. That is what we are against. We have people in the top positions of corruption who are supposed to be investigating corruption. I mean, the monitors, Exeter, they said to the Department of Justice that HSBC had not complied. They should not have passed it. So she's got this job to keep her mouth shut, and she won't talk about it. Now that is the problem. The other thing that I did with Steve was, I mean, Steve knows more about this than I do, but it was great to hear from him that the FCA have now, or the banks have now avoided the senior management regime because they are sidetracking it through to the lawyers to deal with all those compliance issues. So if it's the lawyers themselves that are dealing with the compliance issues, they're not bound by the regulation. So, but I would recommend if you put the link into the video or something, because Steve explains it much better than I. But it's another scam. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the FCA is a protection racket. And the problem is it's the top. And I'm sorry that Kevin Hollinrake is here. I mean, I'm not sorry he's here, but I'm sorry to say this in his presence. It is MPs, it is the Treasury, it is the people at the top that need to be held to account. Why do we have Lisa Ostrovsky at the SFO? It's a scandal.
Thank you, Nicholas. Andrew Candy has very kindly and very helpfully put the link to the video you've just referred to in the chat. You're welcome. You're welcome. I watched it. I think it was like 7:30 in the morning a few weeks ago. I couldn't believe what the video shows. Please all do take time to watch that. So thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, John. Let's now go to Liz Watson. We do need to keep it as tight as we can for time. I know Liz has got so much really, really powerful and valuable stuff to say. But Liz, just kick off with your thoughts about the work that Anthony's been doing, and then share anything else you'd like to. Thank you, Liz. Thank you.
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, I'd just like to say how much admiration I've got for Anthony Stansfeld, and I think where would we be without him?
Yep.
I think he's the most remarkable law enforcement official I've ever come across. I couldn't wait to track him down in the beginning of 2018 and met an assistant of his in the Supreme Court cafe with Michelle and a few others, and never looked back. And I think he's doing fantastic work. He's too precious to let him go. Anthony, you're valuable to us, and I agree with everything Andy said about how can we best create a support structure to really impact this. I just want to say that Anthony's always been there when things have been dire. He's gone the extra mile. He's an extraordinary, compassionate person, which is something sadly lacking amongst many court officers and officials these days. And I think he should be, greatly praised. And as for DLA Piper and KPMG, I mean, I submit that we need to have a royal inquiry into what they're up to, because we need something that's victim-led, but with the backing of proper funding and investigation, because this is a racket that's been going on across the whole UK. Our courts have indeed been weaponized, and it's a revolving door system. And from root to branch, I mean, if you look at the whole setup with somebody like Alan Jenkins, ex-chairman of Evershed's big name law firm, Global, there he is, having resigned from his post as CEO of Eversheds. He's now sitting as on the board of the Financial Ombudsman, and guess what? We're up against Eversheds for 14 years in British courts, and we get ducked down repeatedly. That's why we're still stuck in the legal straitjacket. Evershed's Alan Jenkins is also sitting on the board of the Crown Prosecution Service. So that's what I mean about the revolving doors, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say that judges are failing to sit independently. This is a myth, and that needs looking into. They need holding to account. They have, many of them have feet of clay. There are some very fine judges, don't get me wrong, but where you're getting court orders put against your name and then have an extended civil restraint order put on you, like I have, when the court order was in favour of a non-designated party like Royal Bank of Scotland, because they make these little convenient mistakes, because it's like one revolving door in the banks as well. They've all got these different trading names. I mean, I think Lloyd's Group has got hundreds of alias banking identities, some real, some fake, many fake. And it's the fake ones that are the most dangerous, because shadow banking, which is where Lord Prem Sikka comes in, who I have tremendous admiration for, who's really clued up about shadow banking, and he's tried to get this area of hedge funds regulated, and perhaps Prem could speak more on that soon, and it was turned down by Treasury. I think another thing I want to add is that we've had 15 fake bank accounts set up in our names, me and my husband, because we never had a mortgage. It was all paid off many years ago, and they've put something like 8 mortgages in our name. And now we've been bankrupted without anyone being able to show us the debt, so we can't settle the debt. So we are literally tied to a totem pole of legal mafia behavior, and nobody's stopping it. There's no legislation to protect the innocent. You go to a criminal barrister, they only want to defend the criminals. There's nobody ready to attack the criminal behavior. I'd like to say that this is what is extraordinary, that court orders are being procured by fraud through an abusive process, blocking all relevant disclosures, frequently no proof of debt on false bankruptcies, no cause of action, no disclosure of a prima facie case, which is all written in the law books as being required. It's like, what is going on? A fair hearing is a myth of the past, and probably Bleak House, things haven't changed much now in 2021. And often this is all being done without there even being an issued or served claim. That's what happened to me and my husband. We've had 14 years in British courts, statute barred back in 2014. They're still carrying on. Eversheds have frozen all our money through KPMG. And Anthony was quite right to challenge the misuse of our courts to further the frauds of the banksters who are running clone banks off ledger, offshore, and they've stolen the money back in 2001, and it's been covered up by the SFO, who cocked up the trial deliberately and were assisted by DLA Piper to achieve that. And I have first-hand evidence, but where can I get it heard? Where do I go to get it heard? Anthony is 100% right. The racket is so entrenched, it's so deep, it's so wide, and I've traced the money that's been stolen from 400 victims, including Andrew Lloyd Webber, Norris McWhirter, the founder of the Guinness Book of Records, Terry Brady, Lord Leitrim. Many famous, well-heeled, intelligent people were robbed of their life savings, branded bankrupt, and left by the road bleeding because of the cover-ups in the establishment. The MCA don't want to do their work. They're asleep at the wheel. They're clueless. They're so far south of the reality check they all need. Ditto SFO. I mean, Lisa Osofsky, she's an American barrister, I understand. She is like the 3 monkeys come to mind, you know, see, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, but they're doing evil, and nobody's stopping them. There's no punishment for false claims, for example. Why not? We're told a court order is valid until it is set aside. How do you set aside a void order, which is based on a fake account, which is based on an unissued, unserved claim? And in our case, bankruptcies were created, they were swapped for a forged charge on our house, which was actually on a fake title number, which I only found out 22 years after the deed had been done. Land registry, our problems began with land registry. I'm very keen to go back to land registry now, but they've, what do they use the word? Disconnected me or dissociated me, disbarred me. These are the kind of roots I think we have to go to the genesis of every problem has got a starting point. And with us, it started with the theft of our freehold, the theft of my purchase cash, and then they used the freehold to take out lots of mortgages in our name, identity theft. And hey, you know, they have to get rid of me and the house. because if they don't, they'll all go to prison. So this is what we're up against. The courts, they're all helping their mates, court officers making massive monetary awards to their fellow officers. I don't know what's going on with the judges, but some of them do not, they seem the opposite of independent. Let's say to that. So Anthony, you're right on track. We need you. Let's keep on this track. Let's go to the area we're told we have to get our remedy, where we're being ducked down, frozen out, silenced, and we're being, I've got these orders made in how can I have an order in favour of Royal Bank of Scotland and be told that my orders, my claim is without merit? Because
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
you.
It's like setting off a firework. It's fantastic, Liz. Thank you. Can we please show our appreciation to Liz? Thank you very much indeed, Liz. And we're going to go straight from Liz to Helen McGregor. Helen, please tell us how you see it. Go for it. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Andy. Yes, I'd just like to thank Anthony actually for his recent support on the Ready to Invest property fraud that we sent across quite recently, and the excellent presentation. The observations in your presentation are so similar to the bad experiences we've actually had with fraud agencies, regulators and regulated entities. As far as we know, R2I is one of the largest uninvestigated frauds in the UK. Around 100 million, we reckon, of investor funds have simply gone missing. I'm also joined by two fellow R2I investors, namely Brett, who's an ex-policeman and has been actually in correspondence with you, Anthony, and David, who's a former tax partner, who's got a huge amount of evidence, lodged financial impropriety relating to R2I. We've got a collusion on so many levels here, and it seems that the government agencies, regulators, regulated entities are just so keen to sweep the fraud under the carpet. So we start off with the FCA. They had full knowledge of serious financial irregularities on R2I at least 12 months before our Validuca investment scheme was even marketed. They did absolutely nothing about it. They took no action. They were then warned from 2010 onwards. Again, they took no action. All this time, R2I was actually marketing this very unlawful, alleged fraudulent Ponzi scheme. We then even one of the guys from Jersey Fund scandal wrote to Martin Wheatley, the FCA CEO at the time. Again, the FCA took no action. And I think this goes back to the Dame Gloucester findings, where she concluded that, in fact, the FCA felt we have no responsibility for fraud. So if it's reported to them, it's none of their business, and nothing ever happens. And of course, this came to light with the contact centre and failures there as well, which is quite shocking. We then have the bank. So the bank operated the R2I bank accounts. They had full knowledge of the serious fraudulent activities before they even opened up the bank accounts for this investment scheme. And they so effectively supported, they facilitated this unlawful alleged fraudulent investment scheme. We eventually got bank statement evidence, and within, I think, 5 minutes, we could see, identify highly suspicious transactions, and yet nothing had happened. We then have the liquidators. So they were appointed, but they had no funds to investigate anything. However, we've done loads of forensic work and investigation. We offered to meet with them, but they told us the meeting was not necessary. So after about 4 years, they arrived at an astonishing conclusion that everything was above board when millions of investor funds had disappeared without explanation. They seemed happy to turn a blind eye. And we've had some more recent liquidators that have been really equally ineffective. And we have a very strong case against the bank, but they didn't assign the claim to us. We could have done it ourselves, and yet we're not even, we've been prevented from doing that. We then have the police, Sussex Police. They investigated these activities, but they ran out of funds. We reported to Action Fraud, but they told us that our report, which was in a little 3,000 words, was not a crime. And yet we've got evidence of fraud signatures, escrow account fraud, filing of false and fraudulent financial statements, serious misappropriation of funds, serious property fraud, Ponzi scheme fraud. It's incredible, the evidence we've got. The SFO told us the case did not meet the statement of principles. National Fraud Intelligence Bureau said there was no evidence of fraud because they had spoken to the liquidators, who of course investigated nothing and were asleep at the wheel and turned a blind eye. We then, Santi, kindly, you suggested we go to National Crime Agency, but they've now come back and told us to go back to Action Fraud and the local police. So it's all a big circle. They're all very keen to sweep this serious crime, which we think is a huge scandal, under the carpet. So, I mean, Auntie, I just want to thank you so much for what you've done, and that you've got the courage to speak out. And I'm so sorry you've been attacked when you're actually trying to fix a broken system. I think my concern is, what do we do now you're going? You seem to be the only person we can turn to. So I really would like to have an answer in terms of how we take our case forward, because we do feel there's potentially going to be a serious miscarriage of justice otherwise. I've also got my two colleagues, Brett and David. I don't know if they'd like to say anything.
Thank you very much, Helen. That's great.
Yes.
Let's go to your colleagues. If you can, please keep it as short as you possibly can. But let's go to Helen's colleagues briefly, please. Please just speak. Thank you.
It's David Arnold here, and Helen, thanks for that introduction. First of all, I'd like to thank Anthony as well for his support in all the work that we're trying to do on the Ready to Invest investigation. I'll keep it very brief, just to say that this was Ready to Invest started off with in a regulated environment, and then they moved off-piste into an unregulated environment. It is only the regulated environment that has been looked at by the FCA and indeed the Jersey Financial Services Commission. The unregulated environment just has not been looked at. And we have a lot of proof of, in fact, we have bank statements of how the fraud has been committed, but getting a hearing from anybody is well nigh impossible. And the police forces in both UK and Jersey, and indeed the regulatory bodies in UK and Jersey, are all saying, we've looked at it, but they've only looked, this is a big iceberg, and they've only looked at the tip of the iceberg, which was the regulated piece. They have not looked at the huge amount of unregulated activity that has been going on below the surface. So we're doing our best, we're fighting, but it's an uphill battle.
Thank you very much, David. Very valuable input there. Helen, do you have another colleague that would like to say something? If so, let's dive into that now.
Yes, Brett. I don't know if Brett would like to say anything.
Brett, speak now or forever hold your peace. I think we're going to move on. Helen, thank you very much. Let's thank Helen and her colleague David for that brief session. Thank you very, very much indeed. And we're going to move on very, very swiftly because we've got quite a bit to go through. I appreciate everyone being so good with time for me tonight. That's great. We're going to go to Mike McGrath, and forgive me if I've mispronounced your surname, Mike. Great to have you with us, Mike. Please share your points. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. Thank you for arranging the event tonight on the fraud and right to fix it, whilst also showing our support to Mr. Anthony Stansfeld, who, as we all know, have spent his valuable time to help victims of serious financial crime. Victims, mainly bank customers, have very few options. They complain firstly to the bank, and the bank, of course, denies any wrongdoing. They advise you to go to the financial ombudsman, and the financial ombudsman is charged £550 per case to extract as much documentation from the bank customer to in complex cases, while receiving very little return from their bank. If the financial ombudsman upholds the complaint in favour of the bank, around 90% of complaints will finish at this stage. So you can understand why a bank is reluctant to admit any wrongdoing, as 90% of the time it only costs the bank £550 to close that complaint. Here is where the process gets expensive, as most customers in the final 10% are usually more determined to lose even more of their hard-earned cash. If they use wrong experts to plead their case incorrectly, they have lost before they've started, and worse, they will be left with a hefty legal bill. Here's a true story. A bank customer had a very good case. A solicitor on board, upfront fees, all looking well. A young solicitor who was working for the said solicitor knocked at the bank customer's door, and the young solicitor begged the bank customer not to go ahead with his claim, as he was convinced Although the complaint was winnable, the odds were totally against the customer. Very few customers will beat a bank in court. Mr. Herbert Bundy, 1975, won £11,000, and Derek Carlisle more recently were the last two of a very few to beat the bank. He explained that his firm were going to take a charge over the bank customer's home, run up costs, and were going to get paid whatever the result at the customer's expense. The bank customer withdrew from the civil procedures, and knowing now the odds of winning in a civil bank case, it was probably the correct decision. My Cardiff MP, Mr. Kevin Brennan, is fully supportive of every request I've made to him to assist myself and my wife Jane to arrange meetings with Mr. Kevin Hollerich in London, represent me in Westminster, and lobby for banking debates. I would suggest every bank customer involves their MP where they can. Your Member of Parliament has many powers to assist you, and these powers can be escalated if MPs act in numbers. While collecting documentation from bank victims to pass to Mr. Anthony Stansfeld, to pass to the NCA, I've heard of horrendous victims cases where family homes have been taken, marriages ended, businesses destroyed, and in some cases, bank customers have taken their own lives. From what is clear, over the last 5 years, individuals such as Anthony Stansfeld and Kevin Hollerich, who have voiced their opinions on financial issues for over a decade, are open to attack, especially from individuals that have taken action against their customers, such as the two businesses that attacked Anthony Stansfeld recently, should be stopped and not upheld. Although we all have different views, our joint forces should be directed at the individuals who exploit bank systems, bank procedures, associated businesses, and the regulators. Could I suggest the TTF coordinate a monthly meeting with bank victims to ensure Anthony Stansfeld regime is not ended here? Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you for such great points you've made there, Mike. Much appreciated. I'm going to share my screen before we go to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to be Nikki Turner, plus I think one or two others in association with Nikki. Some of you may or may not be aware that the Transparency Task Force has we've been working hard, and one of the things that's happened as a result of our very hard work, and very hard work, I don't mind saying, is that we are the secretariat to a new all-party parliamentary group. Now, I think this is significant. So there is an all-party parliamentary group called the APPG on Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services. Here's the website, you're looking at it now. And just to prove it to you, the secretariat is the Transparency Task Force. Here we are. There's myself as the chair, looking a bit smarter than I do right now. Mark Bishop, who's on the call tonight. Sue Lewis, former chair of the FCA's Financial Services Consumer Panel. Richard Emery, who's with us tonight. Alex is with us tonight. Mark Hambling, I think, is with us tonight. Dr. Andy Shmulo. I'll mention Dr. Andy Shmulo. He's been instrumental in developing some regulatory progress in Australia by way of the Royal Commission. No time to explain it now, but it's fantastic. We've got a guy in Australia on this secretariat, Paul Carlier. Many of you know Paul. Many of you know Pauline Creasy. Pauline's with us tonight as well. I'm not sure if Paul Carlier is with us tonight, but another very competent, capable whistleblower. The parliamentarians are these folk. Yeah, the parliamentarians are these folk, and we, the Transparency Task Force. No, I'll need to rephrase that. The secretariat of the APPG. The Secretariat of the APPG has been tasked with gathering evidence in relation to people's experience of the Financial Conduct Authority. And that's one of the projects we've got on the go. And there is tremendous potential. If I had a magic wand, I would somehow use it to persuade Baron Seeker to also join this all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services, because it really would be wonderful to have Baron Seeker with his insight and experience into that APPG as well. So those of you that know the TTF will know that we do have a strategy for driving change. We're not just randomly doing stuff, it's all thought through, well, as best as we can. And the strategy for driving change is about bringing together the thinking of two groups of people. People like us on this call, who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, plus those who have the power and the position to make the change possible. Us on our own, we really can't do very much. We've got to do things to get the people with the power. Power's the key word here, to make what needs to happen happen. And an all-party parliamentary group is just one small part in that strategy that we're working very hard to bring to life. So we're now going to go to our next speaker, Nikki Turner. Please take it away. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, and hello to everybody who's there this evening, and especially to Anthony, who has been obviously absolutely brilliant for the victims of HBOS Reading, and I know he's worked on other cases for Lloyds and Lloyds BSU. Somebody said earlier, we do need a lot more people like Anthony, and I think that although we've heard a lot of negatives tonight, actually you've just shown us a list of MPs who are on this new APPG, and obviously there's also the APPG on fair business banking. And someone else said, and I think I wrote it down, Mike Roth said, you must get your MPs involved. And I know a lot of people are disappointed by their MPs, but actually I think more and more MPs are beginning to understand the scale of the problem. And we need to get a very strong, it's absolutely brilliant that Prem Sikka is now Lord Prem Sikka. We need to get people in the House of Lords and people, MPs, more on side, because ultimately they do have a voice. And the other thing I think we need to get on side is there are good barristers and QCs out there. We had a very good one with I heard somebody laugh then, but we had a very good one with Laidlaw QC, who did a report on the failings of the Griggs review, which resulted in us getting the Cranston review, which just said that the bank had put together a review that was an absolute pile of poo and that we had to redo this. And I think we have to start using the right people more, because unfortunately, the bank's attitude to us ordinary people is we just don't count. And I think the more people that we can get that they are slightly nervous of, if we can get enough of them together, the stronger the case will be. Because if you see an individual customer making a complaint, their view is really, really disappointing. I mean, one of the things that disappointed me most when we were going through the trial, the criminal trial of HBOS Reading, was that they don't call people by names. They call them the connection, which of course over time has got reduced to the con, which says everything about how some bankers think about their customers. As soon as you are a customer with a problem, it's just like saying you're the one who's done the fraudulent action or mis-selling or something like that. So I do think that we need to get more and more people involved at a high level. And I think there are a lot of people who are really beginning to understand that. And if we could find a way to get Anthony at the head of something that gathers together all these people, that would be absolutely fantastic. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, Anthony Stansfield should be Lord Anthony Stansfield and should have a voice in Parliament or in the Lords. I don't think that for one moment that the authorities want that, but that is absolutely what should happen, because we can't lose Anthony's voice at this stage.
Yeah.
So that's really just what I wanted to say. I wanted to thank Anthony, and I've got a ton to say about the FCA, but this is a 2-minute speech, not the full half hour.
Thank you.
And yeah, so let's hope Anthony finds a position now where his voice still counts.
Thank you very much indeed, Nikki. Let's, again, if you don't mind, folks, show our appreciation to what's being said by our speakers. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to go back to Brian Basham shortly, if Brian's still with us. I think he is. And then we're going to go to Baron Sikka. And Baron Sikka, it really would be wonderful to have you on that EPPG. Let's see if you might be happy to do that, because it would create a great opportunity to get your voice amplified even further. Wonderful. Let's go to Brian Basham, please. Brian, are you still with us? If you're here, please do say any final comments you'd like to before we move over to Baron Seeker, and then we'll spend a bit of time throwing it open to others as well. So Brian, are you with us? Brian might have had to go. I think he has. So let's go to Baron Seeker. Prem, thank you for being with us. So please take the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Andy, for organising the event, and it's great to hear Anthony Stansfeld again. Anthony has been an absolute champion of the people's cause, and he's about the only one who's really gone after crooked financiers. So I'm very sorry to see him retire, but I guess he's not really retiring, because he will still be in our corner, as it were, fighting the good fight and helping people as he has always done that. Also great to hear so many other people who are fighting the system, because the system does need to be changed. And the ultimate problem is really our politics, which are really corrupt. All political parties are available for hire to the highest bidder, whether it is big banks, big corporations, accounting firms, or anybody else. And that is where our problem really starts. You mentioned earlier that I had tabled some amendments for the Financial Services Bill. Yes, I have. One of the huge problems first we have in the UK, which can't be addressed by the current bill, is that we don't actually have a central enforcer of company law. We had tomes of company law, but no enforcer. Some bits are fragmented between the FCA, the FRC. That's about it. I wrote to a minister some time ago saying some companies are paying illegal dividends, and whose responsibility is it? I asked to look into it. And the minister's reply was, it's not my department, and that's the biz department. Well, whose is it? I didn't really get a clear answer to that. We have about 41 plus regulators for the finance industry. That is too many. It's too easy to pass the buck. And most of them are not really close to the people. I have tabled one amendment trying to consolidate the number of money laundering regulators. We have 25. 22 of those are outside the Freedom of Information net. We can't even ask them a question. And none of them owe a duty of care to anybody. They are often professional accountancy bodies, law organizations that don't owe a duty of care to the public at all, not even to their members, never mind anybody else. So that's a huge problem. Under the Bribery Act 2010, companies and the senior managers can be prosecuted for failure to prevent bribery. Similar thing happens under the Criminal Finances Act 2017. Companies and their senior directors can be prosecuted for failure to prevent tax evasion, but there is no equivalent law when it comes to, say, accounting fraud, falsifying books, and what many people at this meeting have complained about. None of that. That is just a ridiculous argument. And this week I tabled some written questions in the Lords, and I have a reply. The government's record on enforcing these laws is absolutely abysmal. So nothing happens to any of the big companies. So one of the things I have tabled in the Lords, and Brian Basham was hinting at that, I've tabled for the creation of a supervisory board made up of stakeholders to watch over the executive board of FCA. That could be people like you, Andy, people like Michelle, Julia, Nikki, anybody else, so that you then become in charge. You ask them, why is it taking so long for you to deal with the HBOS frauds or the RBS fraud? What about the forgeries, which people have referred to and many others have cited as well? So the idea would be to put people in control of the executive board. So this supervisory board would not be responsible for the day-to-day running of the FCA, but it is responsible for oversight, asking key questions about the resources, about efficiency, about effectiveness. Now, I'm pretty sure that the government and many others are going to oppose it, but we have to push at every front that we can. Julia earlier was saying about the shadow banking. Yes, shadow banking is completely outside the net of regulation. Hedge funds, private equity, they fund political parties. They are not subject to any of the capital adequacy tests. They're not subject to any stress tests, but they are getting their money from retail banks, investment banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and you know, when they go kaput, the rest of the system will collapse with them. So I tried to table amendments about that, but I understood from various advisors within Parliament that some of these things are beyond the current bill in front of Parliament. Well, I will still find a way of speaking about it. I'm learning a bit of politics, and maybe I will put it to good use. And I had a meeting with the National Union of Journalists. That's all I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, having meetings on Zoom dawn to dusk. I had some meeting with the National Union of Journalists, and they're very concerned about what is called fake news being produced by newspapers, often saying there are no problems or there are only one or two problems. They only have to come to a gathering like this and hear how people's lives have been blighted. And many a journalist is being discouraged from writing about very serious cases. The most public example was Peter Osborne, who resigned from Daily Telegraph because he was not really being encouraged because Daily Telegraph would not write about HSBC. So Peter Osborne resigned eventually in protest. Many of these newspapers are basically disciplined or censored by big corporations because of their ability to advertise. So I think, again, we now live in the era of internet. We can easily create different kind of news media. And I think if anyone's interested, they should really speak to the NUJ. They are very, very interested in that. And they're very concerned that, a lot of these things are being blighted. So together we can do quite a lot. And so it's really good to see a meeting like this, and I'm hoping that Anthony Stansfeld's work will continue, will be continued by whoever succeeds him, but I'm sure all of us will fight the system. Together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. What brilliant insight, what brilliant input. Thank you very, very, very much indeed for that.
By the way, Andy, count me in for that APPG.
Yes. You don't know how significant that is, folks. That's really, really good news. That's really, really good news. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much. There's a quote I've just put into the chat. It's a quote that I got taught this by Brian Basham about, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I love this quote. I love this quote from James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. This is the strap line for the cause that we are on. This is wonderful stuff. Prem, you've made my day, week, month. That is just brilliant news. I'm struggling to contain my excitement. I really am. That's so significant. Can we please go back to Brian? I think Brian's still with us. Oh, no, we're not going to go to Brian. We're going to go to Mark Wright. And then if Brian's still with us, we're going to go to him. Mark, please say whatever you're going to say. But also, if you're not planning to say it, tell everybody about the SMCR situation that you're pretty tuned into. Go for it. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for pulling this together. And Anthony is going to be such a great loss. And it's just a shame that there's not more police forces across the country that have somebody with Anthony's integrity. And I dare say that the issue wouldn't be so toxic as it is currently. Obviously, when we were talking previously, I was mentioning, I don't say this lightly, and if you all have access to my internal emails and email chains with Andrew Bailey, the current Bank of England governor, when he was the CEO of the FCA, I would say that the most dangerous person to the system was Andrew Bailey. And I don't say that lightly. I have all of the email trails to back that up. I've just put a link in shortly. Some of you might be aware that I've launched a judicial review, mainly a lot to do with the conduct of Mr. Bailey. Yeah, and to be quite honest, you know, to have the FCA have multiple complaints, and they just either ignore or just totally blank them when they clearly have a complaints process. But I've mentioned previously, you know, that Andrew Bailey had the name of the signature forgery trainer at RBS a year before it was front page of the Mail on Sunday, and he did nothing with that but bury the information. He had information that RBS were falsifying files. I know that Anthony has been very supportive with the case Broomhead, which has been in the media, and I gave a witness statement to that with 3 senior relationship managers with over 55 years experience using the systems at RBS. And in the first trial, where they crushed Broomhead, out of the 70+ documents, we only found 1 genuine document. The rest had all been fabricated for the bank's position. And we then had, so we had the first witness statement that I gave, and it was a successful, they were trying to get a strikeout, and we overcame that. The judge came back within 3 weeks, and it went in Broomhead's favor. Sadly, we then had the second one, and the evidence was even more compelling. We actually had and signposted, this is what the document should look like. This is what the documents were created to destroy Broomhead previously. And in that judgment, that one took 3 months because the risk was huge of what was going to be disclosed. So whether or not somebody was lent on, whether or not somebody, it was far too dangerous to get out there. But there were documents which would have won the case, which were dismissed. I had whistleblowers from RBS who assisted. I mean, when I first launched and co-founded Bank Confidential, it was purely to protect whistleblowers. But having 25 years at NatWest and RBS, my colleagues have had a gutful. They've had an absolute gutful of the criminal elite, as we call them, within the group, just literally robbing SMEs and getting away with it because they're carved out of SMCR, because there's a loophole, and that is that you cannot go after a director, because as soon as they handle that to the legal function is carved out very cleverly at the final knock-ins with regards to with the SMCR. Now, with regards to Mr. Bailey, I can say now that I received an email at midday on a Saturday, and other executives at the FCA were copied in, and his email to me was, Mr. Wright, can I step in here as CEO? I do not want you sharing any information with anybody else at the FCA. I want you to bring everything to me, and that's basically what I did. I gave Mr. Bailey the information that with regards that, and this was internal from colleagues of mine, that there was a document which was written by somebody very close to Fred the Shred, in that how advantageous it was for the RBS Tier 1 capital ratio to distress viable businesses. And he totally buried that. And I asked why that wasn't part of the GRG report, and that was met with a blank response also. So when I say that I consider Andrew Bailey the most dangerous person whilst he was at the FCA, he is the king at burying information. I've got internal emails from FCA whistleblowers where he basically buried a £2 billion redress with regards to, and he'd been arguing about it for a year. But it's not, like I say, it's not all doom and gloom with regards to Broomhead, because we've had some developments over the last couple of weeks. And what we've actually got, and I'm just going to read a little bit here, because obviously many of you, sadly, Steve is unwell, and he works very closely with the whistleblowers at RBS. And we had a new whistleblower come forward who was disgusted because they watched the second hearing and said the RBS council is committing perjury. How can the RBS council say that all of the documents were provided under the RMP relationship manager platform when we know the key documents were missing? and she was saying they were complete. So basically, we're looking to go back to the previous 2018 judgment. I just want to read you something here, because we were just explaining CPR to the barristers, and it's regarding the case. I can't go in, I won't be able to tell you the names of the individuals, but basically we included some points we got from the RBS RMP system only a few weeks ago that shows the relationship manager was lying through his teeth. We mentioned certain printouts being withheld. Having checked, we looked at CPR and the standard disclosure, what documents are to be disclosed under 31.6. Standard disclosure requires a party to disclose A, the documents on which he relies, B, the documents which, 1, adversely affect his own case, 2, adversely affect another party's case, or 3, support another party's case, and C, the documents which he is required to disclose by relevant practice direction. I'm not sure what else to say. This was done by Steve Middleton with the whistleblowers. The banks have disclosed fake RMP files, withheld key documents, are in contempt of court. The relationship manager has lied through his teeth about the process and what he did, clearly committing perjury. The documents do not support the transcript of the RSM and are not feasible. If that is not enough for an appeal, and perjury and contempt of court are now permissible behaviours in UK courts these days, then I suggest all lawyers could never suggest to clients that justice may prevail, and should confirm that financial strength and influence will always win the day, and therefore turn their lights off. The bank's position in this case is inconsistent, dishonest and farcical, and you now have evidence from the bank's own system that proves this so. So basically, it's going to get very interesting going forward, and many thanks again to Joanne and to Alex, who've reached out to me with regards to the judicial review, and I am now going to put the link in with the recent coverage of the judicial review, and look forward to working with you all. And thanks for the suggestion of a special meeting that we're going to have with regards to the judicial review against the Complaints Commissioner and the FCA cover-up in what is blatant market abuse, and it affects everybody globally. You know, NatWest and RBS is traded on the US stock exchange. You know, this market abuse would have lost millions of dollars for US citizens as well as UK shareholders. So watch this space. And again, thanks, Andy. And again, thanks to Anthony. I did share with you today the JR, and I hope you enjoyed the read. And like I say, I'm giving a few bits and pieces to Dame Gloucester, because I think Bailey has certainly met his match there.
Wow, fantastic! Such insight. We're hearing some pretty shocking stuff tonight. We really are hearing some pretty shocking stuff. This has got to get sorted. The public need to have an establishment that it can trust, and if we haven't got that, then we cannot build the society we all want to live in. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. I'm going to go to Brian Basham to hopefully just say a couple of words, and then we'll kind of open things up. The session kind of formally ends now, but we're going to just keep going till about 8:30. If everybody runs out of things to say before then of course we can wrap it up early, but I'm happy to carry on if others are. Mr. Brian Basham, would you like to share any thoughts, please? Thank you. If you are still with us. I'm not sure that you are. Brian, are you there? Can Brian wave at me just so I can see him? I'm struggling to see all the different screens at the same time. I think we don't have Brian with us, in which case I'm going to go to Paul Carlier, then Andy Aikenhead, then Mark Bishop. Paul, be as concise as you can, but don't hesitate to hit as hard as you wish. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to echo the same sentiments that, you know, and thanks to Anthony for all that he's done over the years. And I think what Anthony represents is somebody that's actually in a position of authority, that's actually prepared to speak up and stand up. And what you see, and this is where I think the value of the TTF Secretariat on the new APPG is going to be highly valuable, because all of a sudden, you know, we're in the position where we can frame questions and demand answers. You know, the APPG can demand answers. The FCA can't ignore, they can't fob off, and often that's the real problem. I mean, you know, other individuals with with expertise and with evidence will go to the FCA, will go to the police and get fobbed off. And as individuals, what can you do? I've gone to the Treasury Select Committee, I get ignored. The stuff that's gone on with LCNF and Bailey's testimony last week. I mean, I've given the Treasury Select Committee so much evidence over the last year that exposes the FCA's handling of these mini bond cases, and much of what I've done and given the TSC would have exposed Andrew Bailey's nonsense last week. Last week, we all heard him say, if only we'd known about the LCNF and what was going on, we would have done something about it, but it didn't make it out of that call centre. Again, we see this all the time on class actions we work on across the globe. The bank's playing the Scooby-Doo defence. In other words, if it wasn't for those pesky individuals, or if it wasn't for that pesky contact centre, we would have done something. But with the Blackmore bond, I took, which replicates the LCNF, I took it straight to Andrew Bailey. He did nothing. So it didn't get bogged down in the contact centre. He was made aware of it 18 months before it collapsed, and the same outcome. So, everything that he said, but the Treasury Select Committee chose to ignore everything that I presented, and certain members of the Treasury Select Committee were less than adequate in some of the questions they posed, and this is the problem. And I think a lot of it also boils down to the fact that, and John Banerjee, I know, has probably found the same thing, is that when you work in the banking and financial markets on the inside for 30 years, there's an assumption, you kind of get wrapped up in the assumption that everybody knows what's really going on. And it's not until you leave that environment and you start being hired on cases and you realise that even the best lawyers in the world often don't actually know what the case is, and the claimants and the victims will know they're a victim but won't often know how to plead a case or ask the right questions. And I think with the TTF being on the Secretariat and the pooled knowledge and expertise that is behind it, we can do some really fantastic work by drilling down, asking the questions that need to be asked, and holding people accountable to them.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very, very much indeed. Great input. We're going to go to Andy Aitkenhead, then Mark Bishop. Andy, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Wow, sorry. What an evening. It's kind of ironic, actually. I was out going to the post office with my son this morning, and he was saying, "Who are the dodgiest people you've actually ever seen in business, Dad?" And I actually gave him a couple of stories, but they come from a long time ago. But I just had a couple of points. I mean, obviously there's some big themes around conflict of interest and people protecting their interest in cronyism. But I think that there's something else, and I've done a couple of stints as a consultant at HSBC. And if you remember back in 2008, one of the themes that came out was that some of the financial institutions, and HSBC would be one of those, were too complex for the people at the top to understand what was going on. And I can vouch for that to a certain extent. I know that the last time I did some work there, that actually global operations couldn't articulate their end-to-end processes. So there is a significant problem. And I'd say that's one organization that I would say there's actually a culture of mediocrity and laziness. As well as, it's actually interesting that while I was there the last time, they have a financial crime unit. The head of the financial crime unit changed. The person they brought in was the lady who'd actually been one of the prosecution team for the that led to the deferred prosecution. So, and the 5-year, effectively the 5-year program around that. So there's an awful lot of complexity. And if you think what's changed since 2008 in terms of dealing with that complexity, nothing really. Nothing has changed. So regulators might point to the senior management regime, but actually that really has come out tonight, has done nothing. Mm-hmm. And we still have these complex institutions. I think one person has gone to jail in the US, and it was a very lowly person. And that's what happens is actually if somebody suffers, and there was a case at Goldman Sachs where somebody actually was reputed to have stolen some code and ended up in jail, you get a lowly person who suffers. Yeah. The senior people walk away scot-free. So yeah, I mean, it's a pretty challenging environment. but it's good to hear all these stories, and hopefully we can put people together.
Thanks very much, Andy. Great point. I think it is all about combining our energies in some way and coalescing around ideas we believe can make a difference. Thank you very much, Andy. Mark Bishop.
Just one point, Andy, just one point in terms of pulling people together. Paul made the right question. And I think it's, you know, when we're looking at these problems, we've got to focus in on what's the right question to ask that we can focus our energies on.
I absolutely agree. I get that. Thank you, Andy. Mark Bishop.
I'd like to start by echoing what Paul Collier said. I too have found it quite difficult to interest the current chair of the Treasury Committee in certainly the Connaught case, and generally in cases that may be uncomfortable and embarrassing for the FCA and the city. I also think, and I think we should talk about this as the elephant in the room, though I don't think he'd like to be called that. I think that John Glenn is an obstacle on a personal level. And I say that as a Conservative Party member and an activist. I think that the what I would call the corporatist wing of our party, those that are inclined to side with kind of big capital interests, still has some sway, and particularly tends to find its way into the Treasury. And I think that that's a problem, and it's an embarrassment for us as a party. And so I'm happy to find common cause with people in other parties, as well as the kind of populist, kind of red Tory wing of my own party, in trying to solve these problems. The second thing I'd like to do is to ask a question of Anthony Stansfeld, and that is something I actually put in the chat earlier on. I think he has done some amazing things for victims of financial services misconduct. And I think that there is huge opportunity, if he would be willing to do so, to continue to act in that way. And I wonder whether he's given any thought to an ongoing role or involvement with Transparency Task Force that might leverage the skills and the contacts that he has established and the great knowledge that he has of the law, of different police services, the NCA, the SFO, and the Home Office, and the FCA, of course, that might be able to help people who are finding actually the common thread really of today, which is when they believe that there is evidence of wrongdoing, it is very difficult to get these institutions to investigate and take it seriously.
Thank you, Mark. I won't embarrass Anthony by seeking an answer directly to this question, but I think it goes without saying, Anthony, your ongoing input would be extremely valuable and extremely appreciated. And I think Mark was very right to pose that question to you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. I can see we've got Jess has got his hand up as well. We're going to go to Jess, then I'm going to go to Anthony just to see if Anthony would like to make any closing comments before we bring the session to a close. So we're going to go to Jess, then we're going to go back to David. Jess, then David, then Anthony.
Yeah.
Jess, go for it.
Hi guys, I just want to say, look, it's an absolute honour to be actually kind of with everybody. Just very briefly, I've been a chartered accountant in industry in the advertising PR world. I'm a PR guy, and you know, I'm very much into the whole social media side of things. Look, just keep it really brief. We all know what the landscape is. The landscape is a rotten, corrupt system which really just doesn't get anywhere. And I think that's ultimately a fantastic thing what the TTF are doing in keeping that political discussions going on and making great contacts. But can I throw an idea there up here, please, if I could? Yeah, I think there is other elements that we should be considering as well. Look, we're in the 21st century, a huge social media campaign outing not just years and to create our own tweets, our own PR. If it worked for Donald Trump, whether you liked him or not, it's not important. But you know, it works for him. It works. It's the medium that we must adopt to out this particular system. That's the first thing. Secondly, you know, one of my companies is a small TV production company, and Netflix and the documentary genre is the most popular, second to action thrillers. We can, and there is tons of content here, not just within this forum, but the hundreds of other thousands of people who've actually had their house stolen, had every financial crime put upon them, plenty of content to make mini-series and so forth. And I think that's something, again, we should probably, you know, put onto the table. And yeah, I always would say that you know, look, you know, if I had £30,000, I'd probably start making them, but I don't, right? So we've got to start thinking about how we can get some funding in terms of maybe crowdfunding or other people within our network. And the third thing as well is, look, one thing I've seen about the legal process, and my career took me internationally, I spent a bit of time in the States and Malaysia, is they're big on class lawsuit actions, okay? I remember a time 15 years ago, you had to instruct a solicitor to get a barrister because his English was so fantastic that he was the only person who could talk to a judge. It was all smoke and mirrors. Frankly, what it is, we should adopt what they do in class lawsuit actions. There are investment firms which invest in class lawsuit actions because it's a fantastic return on their investors' money. And in order to do that, you get a team, no win, no fee barristers or no win, no fee legal representations backed by funders with class lawsuit action. So for instance, the people who have been with insolvency abuse, there are common threads within that particular insolvency abuse, which is no proof of claims across their assets being sold at extreme market value, and the Insolvency Act is 30 years old. So all I'm suggesting is class lawsuit actions act on common principles within each case. With the whole full signature, I don't know it in detail, but to me that's a full signature which has been common for hundreds or thousands of people. So it will appeal. We should create it as a business asset class, because the language that we have all suffered from has been the extraction of our wealth. It's been people have taken houses, they've taken savings. We have got to now get leverage back, and the language that the establishment can understand is, hey guys, I'm going to sue you with a class lawsuit action. Waiting for laws to change in a system which has been set up to extract wealth, I think is not going to happen very soon. That's my personal point of view.
Jess, thank you very much indeed. Alexandra, can you pick up an action for me? Can you fix up a conversation between myself, Jess, Ian Mitchell QC, and Paul Bates? Paul Bates is with us tonight. Paul, can I invite you to say a few words of introduction? Then we're going to go to David Leahy, and then we're going to go to Anthony Stansfeld. So, Mr. Paul Bates, all the way in Canada, please introduce yourself and just reflect on what Jess has just said. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, and I've enjoyed today's proceedings with great interest. Jess, I'm very supportive of your suggestion of collective redress by class procedure. In the UK, there's a misperception that all class action regimes function as they do in the US, which is not the case. And we have 10 provincial regimes in Canada that I know very well, and there are good models to consider adopting in the UK. And they do, in effect, level the playing field of resources and usage of the court system between well-resourced defendants such as banks that I so frequently sue. I'm surprised any of them will accept me as a customer, and the claimants who need access to justice. The other thing I would say, I know a lot about the UK system as a qualified barrister, and I'd love to participate in the TTF, among other organizations, to implement a class action regime. But the UK system does have world-class case management by judges, so that you can have speed of process. And it really does make financial institutions reckon that the trial's coming, the claim is $1 billion, and they might lose. Then they think, well, maybe they settle the moment they realize that the costs and risks of continuing to fight are more costly than the chance of settlement now. Then they settle.
Absolutely right. And we've got to have a social media campaign which is mirroring that as well. And it's got to be sensationalized. It's got to be $100 million claim against the Ministry of Justice, you know, because this is the thing that will wake them up. And because the language is about money, and it's not about changing the rules. We've got to see it, the way I saw it is, it's a wild west out there. People are walking around with shotguns and people are walking around with pea shooters. So, but we can collectively get together, and Paul, you're absolutely right. I think a class lawsuit action with a great social media campaign, with a documentary going with it, we can create a momentum of which people will settle outside because they don't want the bad press, they don't want it continued. They are so brazen at the moment. So that balance needs to tip.
Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Paul. We'll certainly be picking up on that, and the conversation that's needed will happen. Let's go to David Leahy, and then we're going to go all the way back to Anthony Stansfeld. David, keep it short and sweet for me if you can, please. Thank you.
I can. Thanks, Andy. Just one point, or two, actually. I am now a qualified documentary filmmaker, and I'm working on that. And watch out. We've got a website on private servers abroad, and we will be revealing all. Secondly, the last point, why not change it from within? When your crime commissioner comes up for a re-election, why not put him for it? May not get it, but it will show the opposition. But if you do get it, I'm sure there's people like Anthony that will give you a tip off how to run for it. That's all I got to say. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everybody, for participating. This has been absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Cheers.
No, thanks, David. Well done.
Nice one, David. Nice one. Thank you for your kind compliments to everybody. I think we always work as a team, everybody. That's what's making this, I think personally quite special. Let's go back to Mr. Anthony Stansfeld. Anthony's going to be the last speaker, just to kind of draw things to a close, as he may wish to, and then we'll wrap things up. Anthony, back to you, please. Thank you. I'm assuming Anthony's with us still. I think he is. Anthony, are you there? You might be having a cup of tea, quite possibly. I think that might be the case. Bear with me. I'm just looking through the. Gosh, we've still got loads of people here tonight. Wonderful, Anthony. If you can unmute yourself, please do.
Hey, I don't know quite. My IT has been difficult. Anyway. Well, everybody's been incredibly kind, but I don't really feel that I've achieved enough, actually, because we're still in this very difficult position. But an interesting remark was made about John Glenn, which I would like out, who's been the Treasury Minister, who seems to be most involved. We've had, I think, 4 or 5 parliamentary debates on this now. And in every single one, all, I think, the 7 parties that have turned up at these debates, every single party has agreed something needs to be done. There is no sort of parliamentary dispute about this. Something is very rotten within the system. And then the government minister in the form of John Glenn gets up and reads out basically a Treasury statement that, yes, they're going to look into all this and everything, and absolutely precisely nothing gets done. And I actually, when with Kevin Hollinrake, went to see him and various other people. And I have to say, it's the only time I really had a flaming row with the government minister, because I felt I was just being stopped. And there was absolutely no interest whatsoever from the Treasury in doing anything about this whatsoever. But I think all parliamentary parties agree on this.
Yeah.
But it seems to be stuck within the establishment. And ministers go native is the trouble. They don't stand up. And I was longing for John Glenn to get up at one of these debates and said, yes, I think you are really onto something, and I will get a proper judicial or government or commission or something to look into this. But nothing is ever done like that. And I think we have a serious problem there within the Treasury and within the establishment. And I think all we can do is to try and get over this. But I think Parliament offers the opportunity, because, as I said, I think it's about the only issue when I have not seen any disagreement between the parliamentary parties that this needs sorting out. It is too many ministers going native and then not doing it when they're in position, I'm afraid. So I retire to tend my garden, go fishing, take up gliding again, and anything I can do to help, I will. But unless the government asks me to do anything, I don't really have a platform to do very much in the future, I'm afraid. But many thanks for everybody's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you very much indeed. What a wonderful way to end the session. Thank you very much. Let's all show our appreciation. That's been brilliant. That's been brilliant. We're a teeny tiny team at TTF, but we're punching above our weight. I want to once again acknowledge thanks to my colleague Alexandra, who's made this happen for us. Thank you again to Anthony Stansfeld, all of our speakers, everybody that's listened so attentively. What we've basically got here, folks, is potential. Potential. But that's all we've got at the moment, okay? Potential. Potential is like silver in the mine. You've got to dig it out to get the value. We've got to go through the potentially quite challenging task of turning all the potential latent energy that's within us into real focused, like laser sharp focused action. That's what's needed. But we can do that because we're on a mission. We have a cause that is both noble and necessary. We have more than enough intellectual horsepower, more than enough brains here, more than enough ideas. We just need to be self-disciplined, get organized, strategize, mobilize, and we can do it. Let's basically do what we are capable of doing. Why don't we? Let's just get stuck in and do it. Thank you all very, very much indeed. It's been proud for me to host this session tonight. I'm very, very grateful to everybody for your input. We'll wrap it up there. Go and enjoy the rest of your evening, the rest of your afternoon, or wherever it is you are in the world. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Thank you. Thanks all. Good night all. Good night. Thank you. Thank you very much, Anthony. Thanks all. Thank you.